Human helped an alien girl across the shifting ice. Her quiet nod at the end said everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. David West, a mechanic from a small town in Alaska, had seen his fair share of harsh winters. Yet, nothing prepared him for the storm that was about to descend upon him and a mysterious alien girl stranded in the middle of it. The wind howled like a wild animal, its icy fingers reaching through every crack in his jacket as he trudged through the waist-deep snow. He had been out looking for supplies when the blizzard caught him off guard. Visibility was down to just a few feet, and the freezing temperatures were starting to bite through his insulated layers. But it was something else that caught his attention, something out of place against the white, unforgiving landscape. There, in the distance, he saw her. A figure stumbling through the snow, her movements slow and unsteady. He squinted through the snowstorm, unable to believe what he was seeing. It was an alien girl, her skin a pale, almost translucent blue, glowing faintly in the cold. She was dressed in nothing but tattered clothing that barely shielded her from the freezing cold. David hesitated for a moment. He had heard rumors about strange beings being stranded on Earth after a failed intergalactic expedition, but he never thought he would find one himself. But there was no time to question. The alien girl was clearly in trouble. He took a deep breath, pushing aside any fear or hesitation, and charged forward. As he approached her, the wind picked up, and she stumbled, falling to her knees. David reached out, grabbing her arm to steady her. Hey, it's okay, he said, his voice steady despite the shock. I'm not going to hurt you. Just hold on. Her violet eyes, wide with fear and confusion, locked onto him. She gasped, her breath visible in the frigid air. Why help? Me. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as if she didn't believe he was real. Because I'm not just going to leave you to die out here, David replied. His heart was pounding, and his mind raced to figure out what to do next. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The storm was only getting worse, and she was clearly too weak to stand on her own. But he wasn't about to let her die. He took off his heavy jacket and draped it over her shoulders, then helped her to her feet. She didn't resist, but her body was cold and stiff, and she clung to him like a lifeline. They struggled together through the snow, every step a fight against the storm. The icy winds whipped at their faces, but David kept moving forward, his determination stronger than the blizzard. As they made their way toward shelter, the alien girl leaned against him, her breathing shallow but steady. David's thoughts were consumed by the strange creature beside him. Who was she? What was she doing here? But those questions could wait. Right now, all that mattered was getting her out of the cold. When they finally reached the small cabin David had found shelter in earlier, he kicked the door open with his foot, his arms aching from carrying her the last stretch. Inside, he quickly built a fire and laid her down by the hearth. As the warmth of the flames began to thaw her frozen skin, she finally spoke. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible. David sat beside her, watching as her body slowly regained its color. Her violet eyes met his again, filled with gratitude. I thought I was alone. Not anymore, David replied, his voice soft. He sat there quietly, watching her, waiting for her to rest. As the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, he realized that this moment, this strange encounter, was something that would change his life forever. And as the alien girl closed her eyes, a quiet nod of appreciation was all that was needed to say everything that words could not. As the hours passed, the warmth of the fire slowly melted the chill that had settled deep in Lyra's bones. David sat beside her, watching her every move, his mind still racing from the events that had brought them together. He had never expected anything like this. A stranger, an alien, someone from a distant world. Yet here she was, laying on his cabin floor, her silver blue skin now a more natural hue, her breath steady and calm. He couldn't help but wonder what had brought her to Earth, to this frozen wasteland. Was she lost? Or was there something more? His curiosity was tempered by the reality of the situation. She was alive, but barely. He had done what he could, but he knew there was more to her story. When she stirred, David instinctively reached out to help her sit up. Her violet eyes flickered open, and for a brief moment, she looked at him with a strange mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "How do you feel?" David asked, keeping his voice steady, though a knot of worry tightened in his chest. She hesitated before answering, her voice soft, almost a whisper. I should not be here. This place, it's so cold, and she trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. "You're safe now," David reassured her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone." Lyra looked up at him again, her expression a mix of disbelief and awe. "Why are you helping me? I am nothing but a stranger to you." Her words were simple, but the weight of them hung in the air. David leaned back, his thoughts briefly drifting to the many times he had felt like a stranger in his own world. "Maybe we're not so different," he said slowly. "I've been in places where I didn't know anyone, where I felt lost too. I wouldn't just leave someone stranded out here. Not like this." Lyra's gaze softened, and she looked down at the fire, the crackling warmth filling the silence between them. "My people, we do not trust easily. We are not supposed to trust humans," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I trust you. I don't know why, but I do." David felt a flicker of something, an emotion he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just pity or sympathy. There was something deeper there, something real. "Trust can be hard," he admitted, "but it's a start. It's all we need right now." The fire's light danced across the walls, casting long shadows as the wind howled outside. Lyra looked out the small window, her eyes distant. "Where am I?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with confusion. David followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. "You're in Alaska, on Earth. A place far from where you came." She nodded, though she seemed to be processing his words in a way that suggested she didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation. "How far have I traveled?" she asked, more to herself than to him. "I don't know," David answered, his voice soft. "I don't even know how you got here. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is getting you back on your feet." Lyra finally looked at him, her eyes meeting his in a way that felt like an unspoken promise. "I will never forget this," she said, her voice steady now. "You saved me." David smiled gently, though it felt a little strained. "We're just getting started," he said. The storm outside seemed to grow fiercer, but inside the cabin, the warmth of the fire and the quiet companionship filled the room. David knew this was only the beginning. There was much more to learn about Lyra, about her world, and about the strange bond that was starting to form between them. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let her go, not without a fight. And as Lyra settled back onto the blanket, her tired eyes fluttering shut, David sat there, watching over her, knowing that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. Yet, somehow, he knew this was where he was meant to be. With her, the alien girl he had saved from the cold, now resting in his care. And whatever the future held, he would face it with her by his side. The next morning, the storm outside had subsided, leaving a quiet blanket of snow covering everything in sight. The air was still and sharp, a reminder of the harsh environment David had grown accustomed to. Inside, the warmth of the fire was a stark contrast to the world outside, and for the first time in what felt like ages, David felt a sense of calm. He had spent the night keeping watch over Lyra, making sure the fire stayed alive and the temperature didn't drop too low. He knew it was a temporary solution, but it was all he could offer right now. As the sun began to rise, its pale light creeping through the cabin's small windows, Lyra stirred awake. She blinked against the light, then slowly sat up, her body still stiff from the cold. David was sitting by the fire, his hands wrapped around a mug of steaming coffee. He watched her with a quiet sense of relief. "Good morning," he said softly, offering her a small smile. Lyra looked at him, her expression still guarded but more at ease than the night before. "Morning," she replied, her voice still hoarse but stronger than before. She looked down at the blanket wrapped around her, then at the fire. "I thank you for this. For everything." David nodded, his gaze shifting to the fire. "It's nothing. Just doing what anyone would do," he said, though deep down, he knew it was more than that. There was something about Lyra, something that tugged at him, something he couldn't quite explain. He was used to helping people, used to being the one to fix things. But this was different. She was different. "You said you're not from here," David began, breaking the silence. Where are you from? Lyra hesitated, her eyes flickering to the window as if she were searching for the right words. I am from a place far beyond your world. From a planet called Azura, she said, her voice distant. My people, we are explorers. We travel the galaxy, seeking knowledge, seeking new worlds. But I never expected to end up here. David studied her closely, his curiosity piqued. So you're like an alien explorer? That's incredible. Lyra met his gaze again, her violet eyes softening. I suppose you could say that. But I never imagined I would be stranded on a world like this. I was supposed to be on a mission, but something went wrong. The storm, the crash, she trailed off, her gaze dropping to her hands. It doesn't matter now. I'm just thankful you found me. David wanted to say something, to comfort her, but he wasn't sure how. He wasn't good with words, especially not when it came to emotions. Instead, he just nodded, silently acknowledging her pain. They sat in quiet companionship for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant howling wind. David found himself lost in his thoughts, trying to make sense of everything. An alien girl, stranded on Earth, with a story he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He had always thought the world was big, too big for anyone to truly understand. But now, as he looked at Lyra, he realized that there were things out there, things beyond the stars, that were even bigger than his wildest imagination. Lyra broke the silence again, her voice softer this time. I don't know how long I'll be able to stay here, she said, almost to herself. The storm made it difficult to find the others. They may not even know I'm alive. David's heart went out to her. He had seen the fear in her eyes the night before, the uncertainty, the realization that she might be completely alone. But now, there was something else in her voice, a hint of hope, a glimmer of strength. We'll figure it out, David said, his tone steady. I'll help you find your people, if that's what you want. Lyra looked at him then, her expression searching. You would do that for me? She asked, the weight of her words hanging in the air. David met her gaze without hesitation. I don't know what else to do, he said simply. But if you need help, I'll give it. That's what humans do, right? We help each other. There was a long pause, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Then, slowly, Lyra nodded. Her eyes filled with something David hadn't seen there before. Gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. The fire flickered, casting a warm glow on the two of them. And for a brief moment, in that small cabin, with the world outside frozen in time, David felt like he wasn't alone anymore. He had never imagined that helping an alien girl would bring him this sense of purpose, this quiet understanding. But there it was. And as the day began to unfold, David knew that whatever came next, he wasn't going to leave her side. Not without a fight. As the days passed, the bond between David and Lyra grew stronger. The cabin, once a place of quiet solitude, became a shared space where two very different lives were slowly intertwining. Each morning, David would prepare a simple breakfast, usually coffee and bread, while Lyra sat by the fire, her gaze distant but thoughtful. She was still adjusting to the alien world she had found herself in, the harshness of Earth's winter, the unfamiliar faces, and the constant uncertainty about her people. She would speak little of her past, only hinting at her journey and the mission that had brought her to Earth. But the more David tried to learn about her, the more she seemed to pull away, like a part of her was locked away, hidden beneath the surface. Lyra had told him about her people, the Azurans, who were explorers and travelers from a distant galaxy, seeking knowledge and understanding. She explained how their ships had once traversed vast distances, reaching planets and civilizations that no human had ever dreamed of. But now, stranded on Earth, she was nothing more than a lost traveler. Do you miss your home? David asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Lyra's violet eyes flickered briefly to the window, her expression unreadable. I miss everything, she said softly. The stars, the sky, my people. I didn't think I would ever feel this alone. David felt a pang of sympathy. He had never been far from home, never experienced the kind of isolation Lyra must have felt. You're not alone now, he said, his voice steady but kind. You're here with me, and I'll help you find a way back. She didn't reply immediately, but he saw the faintest glimmer of something in her eyes. Hope. The days turned into weeks, and despite the lingering cold, there was a warmth between them. David kept his promise. He worked hard during the day to gather supplies and make sure Lyra had everything she needed. He even began to repair her exoskeleton, the one she had used to travel before her crash, though it was clear that the technology was unlike anything he had ever seen. Each night, they would talk about their worlds, his, a place of familiar routines, cold winters, and small-town life. Hers, a place of stars and unknown wonders. Slowly, David learned more about her species, how they had evolved on a planet where the sky was always a deep shade of purple, and their civilization had flourished under vast, glowing moons. But despite their advancements, Lyra's people were not immune to the same challenges that plagued Earth. They had lost contact with their fleet, and now, Lyra found herself stranded, with no clear path forward. One evening, after weeks of quiet companionship, Lyra approached David as he was working on her exoskeleton. Her steps were tentative, as if unsure of her place in the small cabin. "David," she began, her voice unusually soft. "I want to thank you. For everything. For not abandoning me." David paused, looking up from his work. "You don't have to thank me," he said, shaking his head. "I just did what anyone would do." But Lyra shook her head, stepping closer to him. "No, not everyone would have. Not everyone would have helped someone like me. But you did." There was something in her voice, something genuine and deep that caught David off guard. He set down his tools and looked at her, really looked at her. "I'm just glad I found you," he said quietly. She stood there for a moment, the firelight flickering in her eyes. Then, without another word, she nodded, her quiet, silent acknowledgement of the connection that had formed between them. It wasn't the kind of bond that could be easily explained, but it was real. It was something that had grown over time, a result of mutual respect, understanding, and an unspoken promise. The night fell silent around them, the storm outside long gone, leaving behind a stillness that seemed to reflect the calm inside the cabin. David didn't know what the future held for him or Lyra, but in that moment, he knew he had made the right choice. No matter what came next, he wasn't going to let her go, not without a fight. Days passed, and the world outside the cabin began to show signs of thawing. The snow was melting, revealing patches of earth that had been hidden under layers of ice. The cold still held its grip, but it was becoming more manageable. Inside, David and Lyra had settled into a routine. Each morning, David would check the weather and make sure they had enough supplies to last through the day. Lyra, though still recovering, was beginning to help, offering suggestions as they worked together on the repairs to her exoskeleton. It was an odd partnership, but it worked. David had always been a practical man, a hands-on worker. He found comfort in fixing things, in knowing that there was something he could do to make things right. But this situation, this connection with Lyra, was different. It wasn't something that could be fixed with tools or mechanical knowledge. It required patience, understanding, and trust. As Lyra grew stronger, her confidence began to return. She spoke more about her people, about Azura, the distant planet she called home. She described the endless purple skies, the towering trees that reached up toward stars humans would never see, and the sounds of her planet, the soft hum of energy flowing through the cities, the deep pulse of the natural world. "It's beautiful," Lyra said one evening, her voice distant, as if she were speaking of a dream. "But it's nothing compared to Earth. There's a rawness here, a life that is so tangible." David looked at her, a little surprised. He had never thought of Earth in that way. He had always seen it as harsh, unforgiving, a place where survival was a daily battle. "You miss it, don't you?" he asked quietly. Lyra nodded, her violet eyes reflecting the firelight. "I miss everything about it. The sounds, the colors, the people, my family. But I never imagined I would feel this kind of loss, not in the way that I do now. It's as if I've been ripped away from everything I knew, thrown into a world that doesn't make sense." David understood more than he could say. He had never been far from home, but the feeling of isolation, of being cut off from everything familiar, was something he could relate to. "I get it," he said, his voice steady. "I don't know what it's like to be where you are, but I know what it's like to feel lost." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Lyra's head rested against the back of the chair, her eyes closed. David watched her, his mind wandering to the future. They both knew that eventually, they would have to leave the cabin. They couldn't stay hidden forever. But for now, this quiet space, this shared existence, felt like a kind of peace. The days that followed were filled with small moments. Working on the exoskeleton, gathering firewood, cooking meals together. Sometimes they would talk, sometimes they wouldn't. But there was an unspoken understanding between them, a mutual respect that neither of them had expected when they first met. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the snowy landscape, Lyra turned to David with a question that had been on her mind for some time. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft. David looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "We keep going," he said. "One day at a time. We find a way to get you back to your people, and I'll help you do that. But right now, we make the most of this. We survive. Together." Lyra smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "Together," she repeated, and in that moment, David knew that whatever came next, they would face it as a team. There was a bond between them now, something that went beyond the simple act of survival. They had both changed, both grown in ways they hadn't anticipated, and whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. The days had turned into weeks, and the once harsh, unwelcoming landscape of Alaska had begun to show the signs of spring. The snow was melting faster now, and while the cold still lingered, the days grew longer, warmer. Inside the cabin, life had taken on a quiet rhythm. David and Lyra worked together, their movements synchronized in a way that felt natural. He continued to make repairs to her exoskeleton, and she helped in whatever way she could, her sharp mind quickly grasping the concepts he explained. Their conversations, once tentative and full of awkward silences, had evolved into something deeper, something that transcended their differences. David had always believed that actions spoke louder than words. He had never been one to speak much about his feelings. He preferred to show people that he cared through the things he did, through the small gestures, the silent support. And in his way, he had been trying to show Lyra that she wasn't alone. Every day, he would do what needed to be done, all the while keeping an eye on her, making sure she was okay. Lyra, on the other hand, had slowly begun to open up. She spoke more freely about her people, her home, and her past. Her stories about Azura, the planet she had come from, had begun to paint a vivid picture in David's mind. He had always imagined a world far removed from his own, one filled with alien landscapes and technologies that were beyond his understanding. Yet, as Lyra spoke of her world, he saw it through her eyes, felt it through her words. The depth of her longing for home was evident. In the way her voice would soften when she spoke of the stars, the sky, the way her people lived in harmony with their planet. Yet, there was also a quiet acceptance in her words now. She no longer spoke of her home with the same sorrow she had in the beginning. It was as if the bond they had formed here, on Earth, had begun to fill the void left by her isolation. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a muted orange, Lyra sat by the window, gazing out at the vast landscape. David joined her, his steps slow and deliberate. "You're thinking about home again, aren't you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lyra nodded, but there was no sadness in her eyes this time. Instead, there was a kind of peace, an understanding that had been absent before. "I miss it," she said, her voice soft, but steady. "But I've come to realize something. Home isn't just a place. It's the people you're with, the ones who stand by you when you're lost. And right now, I have that." David didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't good with emotions, especially not when it came to something as complicated as this. But as he looked at her, he understood. He understood that it wasn't just about her going home. It was about finding a place to belong, a place where she was seen, where she mattered. And in that moment, David realized that he had become that place for her, just as she had become that place for him. "You're not alone, Lyra," David said, his voice steady, as if reaffirming a truth he had come to accept. She turned to look at him, her violet eyes meeting his with an intensity that took him by surprise. "And neither are you," she replied. The words hung in the air between them, a promise of something unspoken, something more than just survival. As the fire crackled in the background, they sat there together in the quiet, the weight of their shared understanding settling in like a comfortable weight. The storm outside had passed, and while there was still uncertainty ahead, they both knew they could face it. Together, the days had begun to lengthen as spring continued to make its slow but steady progress. The snow was mostly gone now, though. The nights still held a bitter chill. Inside the cabin, warmth had become more than just physical. It was in the quiet companionship that had formed between David and Lyra. Their daily routines had become intertwined, and while the world outside still felt distant and uncertain, there was a sense of stability here. One evening, after a long day of repairs and gathering what little supplies they could, David sat down by the fire, stretching his legs out in front of him. Lyra, now stronger, was sitting at the table, examining the modifications he had made to her exoskeleton. It was starting to look like it could be operational again, but there were still a few issues to work out. Lyra looked up from her work, catching David's gaze. "It's getting better," she said, her voice steady but tinged with relief. "I think it might work soon." David smiled, though his mind was elsewhere. He had been thinking about what Lyra had said weeks ago, about her home, about Azura. It seemed like the right time to ask her more about it. "Lyra," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "You said once that home isn't just a place. But what if you could go back?" She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze flickered to the fire, as if the question had taken her by surprise. After a moment, she sighed, setting down the tool in her hand. "It's not that simple, David," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I want to go back, of course I do. But even if I could, I'm not sure what I'd return to. My people. I don't know if they'll ever find me, or if they'll still accept me." David leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowing in thought. "You've been through a lot," he said gently. "But you're not alone anymore. I'm here." Lyra's expression softened at his words, though she quickly turned her gaze away. "It's not just about being alone, David," she murmured. "It's about feeling like you belong, like you're a part of something bigger. My people, they don't understand weakness. They don't understand failure. And I don't know if I could go back and face them." David's heart ached for her. He could see the fear and uncertainty in her eyes, but there was also a strength there, a resilience he admired. "Maybe they're not the ones who need to accept you," he said quietly. "Maybe it's you who needs to accept yourself." Lyra didn't respond right away, but her lips pressed into a thin line. She seemed to be considering his words carefully. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "But I think you're right. Maybe I've been holding on to something that I need to let go of." David stood and walked over to her, offering his hand. "Then maybe we can figure it out together." Lyra looked at him for a moment, her violet eyes searching his face. Finally, she took his hand, her grip warm and steady. "Together," she agreed. They stood there for a moment, the fire crackling in the background, the sound of the wind outside now a distant hum. The weight of their shared understanding seemed to fill the room, an unspoken promise between them. In that moment, it didn't matter where Lyra came from, or where she would go. What mattered was that they were here, together, and for the first time in a long while, David felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was living. And as the days continued to unfold, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. As the days grew warmer, the quiet routine of their life continued. David had become more accustomed to Lyra's presence, and she, too, seemed to have adjusted to the steady rhythm of their days. They had found a balance in their shared space, each day bringing its own small victories and challenges. The exoskeleton was nearly complete now, with only a few adjustments left to be made before it would be fully functional. Lyra had insisted on helping, her knowledge of her own technology coming back in waves as they worked together. The cabin, once a place of isolation, had become a small sanctuary, a space where the weight of their worlds could be set aside for a while. One afternoon, as they were sitting outside, enjoying the rare warmth of the sun, Lyra turned to David, her expression thoughtful. "David," she began, her voice soft but filled with a quiet strength, "I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything that's happened, about what I've left behind, and what's ahead." David looked at her, his expression neutral, but his heart heavy with the understanding that this conversation was coming. They had avoided talking about the future for some time, unsure of how to approach it. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice steady. Lyra shifted slightly, her gaze drifting to the distant horizon. "I know I can't stay here forever," she said, her voice tinged with a sadness that David had not heard before. "You've helped me, more than anyone ever has. But I need to find my people. I need to know if they're still out there, if there's still a place for me." David felt a pang in his chest. He had known this moment would come, but hearing it from Lyra made it feel all the more real. He had grown attached to her, more than he had expected, and the thought of her leaving, of returning to a world so far away from his own, was harder than he had imagined. "I understand," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. "You deserve to find your people, to know where you belong." There was a long silence between them, one filled with unspoken words and emotions neither of them knew how to express. Finally, Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes searching his face. "David, I'm not asking you to come with me. I know this isn't your world, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll never forget what you did for me. You gave me a chance when no one else would, and for that, I will be forever grateful." David reached out, his hand brushing against hers in a gesture of comfort. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I'm just glad I could help. You've been through so much, Lyra. You deserve to find peace." She squeezed his hand gently, a quiet strength radiating from her. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I know I've found something here. A kind of hope, and that's something I never thought I would have again." The silence between them was thick with unspoken understanding. They both knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but they also knew that they had given each other something precious, something that neither of them could easily let go of. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow across the landscape, David felt a sense of calm settle over him. Whatever the future held, whatever paths they would each take, they would carry the memory of this time together. For now, that was enough. The wind whispered through the trees, and for a moment, all was still. Just two people, standing on the edge of an uncertain world, but with a quiet sense of peace in their hearts. The morning came with a crisp breeze, signaling the start of a new chapter in their shared journey. David and Lyra had spent the previous day preparing for the inevitable, the moment when they would leave the cabin and step into the unknown. It was a strange feeling, one that neither of them had anticipated when they first met. But now, with the exoskeleton fully repaired and Lyra stronger than she had been when she first arrived, the time had come. They had spent weeks together, building something that neither of them had expected, a bond, a partnership, a quiet understanding that transcended words. David had never imagined that his life would take such a turn, that he would find himself helping an alien stranded on Earth. But now, as they stood at the edge of the cabin, ready to face whatever awaited them, he knew it had been worth it. Lyra adjusted the straps on her exoskeleton, her hands steady despite the weight of the decision she had made. She looked at David, her violet eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and determination. "Are you ready?" David asked, his voice steady but laced with a hint of uncertainty. Lyra nodded, her lips curving into a small but genuine smile. "I am," she said, "but I'll need your help. I can't do this alone." David gave her a reassuring smile, his heart swelling with pride. "You're not alone," he said, his voice firm. "Not now, not ever." They made their way through the snow, the world around them still and quiet, the air sharp and crisp. David felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that this was the right path for both of them. Lyra was not just an alien, not just a stranger from another world. She was a person, a companion, someone he had come to care for in ways he had never expected. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers and challenges they couldn't foresee, but David was ready. They both were. As they walked, Lyra spoke more about her home, her planet, and the people she had left behind. She spoke of the stars, the cities that shimmered beneath the light of multiple moons, and the sense of unity that had once defined her civilization. But she also spoke of loss, the loss of her family, of her mission, of the connection to her people that had been severed when she had ended up on Earth. "I don't know if I'll ever find them," she said softly, her voice distant. "But I have to try." David glanced at her, his face set with determination. "We'll find them," he said. "And if we can't, we'll make a new path. Together." As they continued walking, the sun began to rise higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over the landscape. The mountains in the distance were still covered in snow, their peaks reaching up to the sky as if to touch the stars. David took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose, a sense that everything was aligned just right. He didn't know what the future held, or where this journey would take them, but he knew that he and Lyra were on the same path, and that was enough. The world around them seemed vast and endless, filled with both danger and beauty. But in that moment, with Lyra by his side, David felt like he could face whatever came next. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, and for the first time, he understood what it truly meant to have someone to share that life with. The road ahead was uncertain, but as long as they were together, David knew they would face it, one step at a time.